Welcome. This is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World. I'm your host, Melissa Batchelor, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about nurse innovation and robotics. So I'm joined by Dr. Pam Cacchione. So welcome back. You've been on
Thank
this
you.
podcast before and did live television with me before. So before we begin, why don't you tell our listeners about a little bit about you and about your work?
Great. Sure. Hi, I'm Dr. Pam Cacchione. I'm faculty at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. I'm a professor of geropsychiatric nursing, as well as the Ralston House Term Chair of Gerontological Nursing and a nurse scientist at Penn Presbyterian Medical Center. I started my career looking at delirium in my research trajectory, and then did a postdoc at University of Iowa where I looked at the impact of sensory impairment on delirium and the increased risk for delirium in visually and hearing impaired older adults. And so I went on to investigate a nursing intervention, an evidence-based nursing intervention for sensory impaired older adults in long-term care settings, where we tried to improve vision and hearing so that they could engage more fully and have better functioning. And as we know now, we didn't know then that improving vision and hearing has a direct impact on their risk of cognitive impairment, but also their risk of mortality. So it's the sensory impairment has become a really significant contributor to healthy aging. So trying to address sensory impairments really does make an impact on healthy aging. So in the meantime, I made connections with some engineers here at the University of Pennsylvania and have become almost a human factors type researcher now with the interaction of technology and robotics, which we're going to talk about today, and older adults and how to design robots for older adults based on my expertise in sensory impairment. So that's kind of how that came into play. And I'm very excited to join you today to talk about robotics and older adults. It's quite fun.
Okay. And I just had two thoughts about that before we move on. I think, first of all, this is the first time I've ever understood what your Twitter handle was about and what it meant, because you're at Aging Sense 1. And so now that I know that the sense is about sensory impairment, that makes sense. And then, in my own work, I talk about how Alzheimer's disease impacts your sensory abilities, because that drives a lot of the behaviors that we see with that. So anybody that's listened to my podcast before knows a little bit about sensory impairment. So let's take a little bit deeper dive now into kind of how you got from kind of your vision and hearing research into robotics, and then describing what that work looks like now.
Yeah,
what type of robot have you designed?
Great. So my past robotics research has been with Dr. Michelle Johnson and Dr. Mark Yim, who are both roboticists. One is in the School of Medicine and one is in the School of Engineering. And so Dr. Michelle Johnson has a robotics lab in the School of Medicine at our Rehab Institute. And then Dr. Mark Yim, his expertise is primarily in robotic arms. So that's been a lot of fun to collaborate with both of them. We've had to learn each other's language, and so it's been quite entertaining. I think I was an attractive partner with them because of not only because of my expertise in vision and hearing impairment and how to design for older adults, but also because I had patient access. And that at the time I was working at a PACE model program for all-inclusive care for older adults. And so older adults come to the setting anywhere from 1 day a week to 5 days a week. And it's a really nice learning laboratory. And our older adults, because the LIFE program in Pennsylvania, PACE model programs are called Living Independently for Elders. So we call them LIFE programs here in Pennsylvania. And so at the LIFE program, it was affiliated with the School of Nursing. It was developed by faculty at the School of Nursing. And so therefore, they were used to having nurse researchers come to the LIFE program to actually do their research there. So I had all my PhD students do a pilot study there, if not their dissertation. And then I often did my own research there as well. And then the robotics research, it was a really exciting setting because you have older adults congregating in a one place that come in, but then go home at night. So you have a little bit of time where you can engage with the older adults. And the setting was very supportive of doing research, as it is now. The School of Nursing has since sold the Life program to Trinity Health, and so now it's Mercy Life West Philadelphia, and I'm still on their research and education committee. So we still do our research there in robotics. So it's been quite exciting. So the first study was using a commercially available, low-cost mobile robot to assist older adults with activities of daily living. It was funded by the National Science Foundation. And we did stakeholder interviews initially to identify what the robot should do. And it was decided based on these interviews from providers like clinicians, paid caregivers, and then the older adults themselves, that the robot would encourage ambulation or walking, encourage hydration or drinking water, basically, and then a reach task. So being able to pick something up off the floor or reach something out of the high cabinet for an older adult would be very helpful. And then the other thing we learned during those interviews with the older adults, they wanted research to be fun and competitive. Like we knew we needed to have the research be fun for them. Like that's important for them to fully engage. And but competitive was like, really? So I'll get to that, but it was really quite impactful, that statement, and it really did make the third part reaching task a lot more fun for them. But anyway, I can stop here for a minute if you have any questions, and then I'll go on to what we did.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you said they wanted it competitive, I was like, okay, it sounds like Robot Wars, or I'd have to come up with a name for my competition. So,
yeah, they didn't want the robot to be competitive. They wanted to be competitive against another older adult. Like they wanted to do like a dance off or something. Like they wanted really to have a winner of some kind. So for what we had initially attempted to have the robot be self-propelling and be able to learn the environment, which it had the software to do, and then to knock on doors and actually be able to get an older adult in their apartment to come out and walk with them and then get hydrated. And unfortunately, because they were in the center a lot of the day and then came home to their apartments in the evening, they were tired and they really didn't want to fully engage. So we went back to a Wizard of Oz type controller of the robot and walking in the center instead. And so to get their feedback on walking, we got much greater participation when we did it that way. And it was quite joyful. At the end, one of the things that we had to do, because it couldn't hear the robot, was we had to add an external speaker because it wasn't loud enough. And so that was interesting. And then some of the design, there were a little smiley face, what appeared to be what we thought was a smile, like eyes, and they thought they were buttons. So we needed to change that design as well.
And what I was thinking too, with the robot not being loud enough, is that the pitch of whatever you set it at, it would need to be a lower frequency because because high frequency hearing loss is so common.
Right.
So to lower the pitch. And see, I think this is one of those examples of where our clinical expertise and the things that we know can help inform what an engineer would do or where they would set it. So I think that's a perfect example of that collaboration, the impact that it can have.
Yeah, we also another thing that a nurse would think of is to have the robot call the individual by name, because you can and they got such a kick out of that. They really enjoyed when the robot said, Mrs. Jones, would you like to go for a walk today?
Or Annie. Yeah.
Yes.
Annie,
whatever they wanted to be called.
Their preferred name.
Right, exactly. So it was quite joyful. And it was a very productive study because we learned a lot of about things that needed to be done, how loud, the design of the interface with the older adult, what they enjoyed about the older adult. And then, so that was for the walking and the water task. And then the reach task, since they added it wanted to be competitive, I'm so excited about this idea. We had at the Life program, we have like an OATS occupational therapy kitchen. So we designed it as the reach task was for the cornhole game. So the older adults played cornhole against each other with beanbags, and the robot retrieved the beanbags from the upper cabinet and then handed them to the older adults. And then once they had thrown the beanbags, the robot went and picked them up and brought them to the older adults. So it was a little scary at times because the older adults got so excited they jump up and down like, well, this is research. We can't have you bowling during research. They really got into it, and it was quite enjoyable.
But
you
great
have
balance.
a lot of difficulties when you're creating these things, and occasionally the arm would break. It was a spiral design of an arm, and occasionally the spiral would just break in half, and you have to stop, rewind it, and start over, and or end that interaction for the day, depending on how things went. But it was very interesting to figure out how to interact with the older adults, how to engage them, and of course, they each got a stipend for participating in the study as well. So they really were and enjoyed participating.
Yeah. And the other thing that you mentioned is how today's older adult, because, we're all aging if we're lucky enough. But if you did not grow up with a lot of technology, some of the things that you recognize in technology, because you've grown up with it, if it's all new to you, you're like, those look like buttons, not eyeballs. And so, but that's going to be different for each kind of generation. So, somebody that's 90 or to 100 is going to be different than someone that's, 60 to 70.
Right. And I had one gentleman who said after the walking task, and he was staring at the robot, he said, it's too bad I'm not going to live long enough to see the full fruition of this. But he was, which was very poignant to me, but it also was, but you are having the opportunity now to interact with a robot. It's like, how many older adults really get that opportunity? And he did really enjoy it. And the other
reminds me, there's a movie, I think it's called Henry.
Yes.
Okay.
That's that one's a very
you can use
robot.
Yeah. Use your powers for good or evil, but
Exactly. And then we followed up that robot. This is a very fun study, but it got totally squashed by COVID-19. We developed, not we, but my colleagues at Penn developed the Quarry robot, QUORI, and it was on display at the Art Museum at the end of 2018, I guess that would have been. And it got locked in the Art Museum when COVID hit, and we lost it for 8 months. We couldn't access the robot because it was locked up in the Art Museum while the Art Museum was closed due to COVID. And so I think we finally got it back. I guess they closed in early March. We got it back in August. And then because of COVID, and our site was the Mercy Life program, older adults weren't coming in except for appointments because you couldn't congregate in large numbers.
But what a safe thing. I mean, from what you've just described earlier, if you have to be isolated in your room, the robot could just go around. At that point, they are in their room.
Yeah, right.
Hey, it's your turn first. Your turn to walk. And then that person walks and goes back in their room. Yeah, that would have been a great. I had never thought about that. That would have been great. I mean, I don't ever want us to have another pandemic, but
right.
Would have been.
There would have been a good opportunity there. Unfortunately, we were funded to do something else in the center, which was really so. What we end up doing is you've worked in long-term care for your career, and I did for a large bulk of my career, 20 years in different nursing homes as a nurse practitioner. During flu season, we always had to answer those flu questions. Do you have any flu symptoms? So even after COVID, they're going to have these screening questions each season of the flu season or RSV now and, whatever else to have the screening questions. So we instead developed our robot we pivoted and turned it into a COVID screener. So it took temperature, supposedly took temperature and asked you the COVID questions. If you responded to them positively, it would send you to a health provider to be assessed and most likely sent home. And if you responded negatively, you were allowed to go into the center. But we tested it with both older adults and the staff that were present at the LIFE program as well. So that was how we tried to make lemonade out of lemons in that particular case. And our hope now is to improve the Corey's motor in his midsection so he can move a little bit better in different directions, and actually use Corey as a exercise robot and dance robot to encourage particularly persons with memory and thinking problems to exercise during the day and engage in music activities and dance. I can envision it doing the Macarena, with its arms and legs.
Well, you might have to match the generational line dances.
I know, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're going to see how that works. I'm planning on writing a grant for that one as well. And they've been working on the adjustments. They've adjusted the speakers to the robot based on our experience with the prior robot. So that was exciting to see. And the robotics face is a little bit different. We did a lot of focus groups with older adults on what they would want the robot to look like. And they wanted it more to look like the Jetson type robot than a more humanoid robot. A more humanoid robot was a little creepy to older adults. They were not like the Sophia robot that's very, I don't know if you've seen her. She's got a full face and she's beautiful, but she is a robot. Like it's, and so that was a little too creepy for them. They didn't like the Henry robot. He was too bossy.
Well, and kind of getting back to the generational line dancing, everyone can learn new things no matter how old you are. So you could have multi-generational.
One of the first robots that we brought to the LIFE program was a little robot. It stood about 3 feet tall, and it was a robot to help patients who post-stroke who couldn't cross midline. So it was an activity to encourage them to cross their midline due to a stroke. And so that was Michelle Johnson's robot. And her grandmother had had a stroke, and she was really interested in pursuing more robotic interventions for patients with stroke. And that's our latest study that we're working on now.
So the first one with the water walking and reaching, that's the relay?
That's relay.
Okay.
Exactly. That's a relay.
Corey ended up turned into being a COVID screener robot just because that's what happened after he breached the walls at the Art History Museum. The soft robot is the one that dances. So he's got a soft middle?
No, that's the soft robot. I skipped the soft robot. The soft robot, that's James Pucool's project. And we have co-investigators across the country working on with the physics of all of that and the intelligence. But I got involved in that project because I was trying to develop a portable seat lift device that you could carry to go to a restaurant or a theater and be able to get out of a seat if you had weak quad strength. And the ones that are out there are really big and bulky. And so I was looking for one that was much more manageable. And this soft robot was designed to actually turn people in bed and roll them up in bed. So it's a soft material. It's just been a fascinating project. And I got invited to do it because they were going to develop the seat lift device as the prototype, as a proof of concept. And so,
which is that's pretty much the same toilet that Frankie and Grace, or Grace and Frankie designed, right? They had a toilet that would lift you off.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was really, that was really fun. I think that was affected significantly by COVID too. So we did we brought them, the team, to the School of Nursing, to our sim lab, and worked with turning patients and pulling patients up in bed and learning more about, the engineers need to learn about how nurses did this to see how that would help. But when I've talked about this robot in the community, people in the community want this because they have loved ones that are bedbound that they're caring for, and it's hard work. And if you're by yourself, and, Hoya lifts usually take 2 people for safety reasons, it's really hard to reposition people in bed.
It is.
So I really think there is a significant market for this. So we're continuing to work on that. So that's still in progress. But it's really cool. It's so fun. I remember, though, there is really, because I'm the human factors piece and the qualitative piece, there is this disconnect with the engineers who really work with math problems and physics and all of these determinations to figure out how to make something move and change shape and all of these different things. And I presented my work, and they're like, I don't get it. You will when you go to deploy this out in the community. You will definitely get what I do when we go to try to deploy this. But right now, I can see how there might be a disconnect between what I do and what you do. But
right.
So it's really fun to be able to share ideas and think things through. And there were no mathematical equations in my presentations, and so it was not good. I got such a kick out of it, though.
Well, maybe you should start them by saying, like, 1 of you plus 1 of me equals a great end product.
Really success.
Yeah. Oh, I would have so much fun with that, Pam. We should talk, because I would be like coming up with something around square root. You could get math into that presentation.
I'm sure I probably could have. So now we're on to the haptic robot, which is a arm movement robot for patients with stroke. So they're sitting and they're doing different movements with their arms and playing video games with their arms with different graspers for different movements. And what's very impressive about it is we've only had one older adult that thought the games were too hard. But most of the older adults said, I've never played video games before, but this was really fun. Right. And just a few hours, a couple times, like an hour each time, playing with this robot or using this robot, again, has improved people's confidence. That's in the pilot work. So we're really looking forward to seeing what happens when they get to use it for 12 weeks.
What I hear you saying is, like, traditional PT after a stroke, you go in, you have to do, like, you're at the gym, but it's right. You doing all the work, and after you've done 12 reps, versus what you're describing is a more engaging and interactive physical, it's still PT. It's all the same things that you would have done in traditional model, but it is more fun. So then that increases motivation. I bet they exercise longer. I bet that they gain their strength back faster, because anybody would rather play a game than sit there and just like plainly work out.
Right. And the importance of this too is it's because it's upper extremity, it ends up being more occupational therapy, and there's so few occupational therapists. And so this is a way that they can set them up on the haptic robot, and we're setting this up so that we can do 3 older adults at a time, and they can even play against each other, again, that competitiveness.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so it is really engaging. So we're again going back to the Mercy Life West Philadelphia and they've been very generous with space. We'll be starting this pilot or this study. We did the pilot. We're going to start the study in February. And so we have to, build the robots, set them up. And then we also have an attention control where they just do regular occupational therapy activities at the center. And then if they don't get a full hour of OT downstairs, we bring them upstairs to do additional occupational therapy to compare an hour of OT versus an hour of using the haptic robot. So that's going to be, I'm really looking forward to that to see. I mean, I did the qualitative interviews after the pilot study, and it was impressive.
Yeah. And just to further make the connection in case we have students listening or even the public, like this is how you have to advance the science around the robots and the improvement in physical functioning and overall health and well-being for any type of condition that it's designed to do. But then, the next, after you've done research and demonstrated effectiveness and efficacy, as well as the pragmatic part of it, which means does it really work and help people in real life, then it could become part of policy.
Right.
Which to me, like, think about you live in a rural area where you don't have access to a lot of major health centers, and your doctor's like, hey, I'm just going to order you this robot who's going to come in. You'll have this robot for a month. It's covered by Medicare, and you can do your physical therapy with your robot. I mean, so those are interesting policy implications for the work that you're doing. And I think particularly undergraduate nursing students sometimes miss that connection between, doing research, the impact on practice, the impact on, your patients, and then what are the policy implications. So I see all of that in your work.
This grant is an STTR also. The main company is called Recupero. And so the interesting part about that is because Dr. Johnson has a relationship with Recupero, she's part owner of that, then it became a bigger role for me as PI, so there wouldn't be a conflict of interest. So,
right.
It's like the
PI,
the ethics. The ethics of doing this research is really interesting as well. And it's really interesting because we got dinged a little bit because of our population is not diverse, which is interesting because it's African American, but it's all African American at Mercy. Not all, but about 95% is all African American at Mercy Life West Philadelphia. And so trying to figure out, can we get people outside that are not African American part of this study will be interesting too. And we haven't answered that question yet, but we'll figure that out. But it's really a fun project.
So did they talk about the Paro, the robotic seal?
I knew that's my other project. This is ongoing. This was funded through the school, actually through 3 sources of funding. I ran across the Paro robot, I think, I don't know which reading or at GAPNA, maybe the Gerontological Advanced Practice Nurses Association. The Paro robot is a robotic seal. It's a plush seal. The fur is silver ionic fur, and so it's antimicrobial, and it has artificial intelligence. It responds to its name. It will respond to the way you interact with it. It will try and get your attention if you're not paying attention to it, and it makes seal noises. The original investigator who developed these in Japan originally started with cats and dogs, but people got bored with the cats and dogs because they didn't respond like someone would expect them to respond for as long of a time as a cat or a dog. So he went and studied baby harp seals and developed these baby harp seals. So I have a white one and a gray one. We see funding from
the like seals.
I'm sorry.
They're shaped like a seal?
Yeah, they're shaped like a seal.
Because when you first said seal to me, I'm thinking something that seals.
Oh, no. Baby harp seals.
Okay, so baby harp seals.
Yes, and so they are, we'll send you pictures.
Okay. Obviously, I'm pretty visual.
But they, people who are listening, you can go and look up it. It's Paro, P-A-R-O, for personal robot. And they're really, I thought they were the most ridiculous things I'd ever seen. And then I picked one up and I'm like, oh, I get it now. And it was weighty and it vibrated and it moved and it looked at you. The eyes, really are quite expressive. The older adults really engage with the face of the robot. Yeah, it's been quite joyful. I've been using them with persons with, the study is to test the efficacy of using, it's a pilot study, using the Paro robot to decrease agitation in persons, hospitalized older adults with dementia and or delirium. And so we have to, because of infection control almost didn't allow us to do this study. Because they were worried this is a plush animal, we're not going to let you do it. And we're like, that's not an acceptable response. These are being used in hospitals and nursing homes. There's, and so there's a very extensive cleaning protocol. And I had to build a UV light box to put them in to clean them, because I had a UV wand and it was just taking too long. And I'm like, the heck with that, I'm going to just build a box. So I built a box. And now I put them in the box for 10 minutes on one side, 10 minutes on the other side, take them out, and they're clean. I test them with an ATP test kit to make sure they're
It's like they have jaundice and they just got to go into the
I know,
like,
exactly.
and like we can't do overnight. We're just going to do something shorter.
Yeah. And so we bring them out into the nurse's station. They have to put an isolation gown on. Now they have to wear a mask, and they interact with this robot. We set it on their laps and they play with it. They can give it a bath with wipes, wipe it down, and they can brush it, and they can talk to it. They can sing to it. They lift it up and dance with it sometimes. I mean, it's amazing what different people will do with the robot. But we sit with them for an hour while they interact with the robot. And now we're getting to the point where we're using them in a pinch. Like if somebody's acutely, and I happen to be on the unit, gets acutely agitated, I can just hand them a robot and distract them out of their agitation. Right. We're trying to get to the point where that's how we use it instead of in the study. So we're almost wrapped up the study. We have about 15 more attention control and 9 more intervention. We, pull a card out of a bag for which their intervention or control. But there, for example, one woman was really didn't have cognitive impairment, but was pulled out of her room abruptly because her roommate, we have semi-private rooms on the acute care for elders unit. Her roommate had a rapid response, and they needed the space to get the team in there to treat her and needed privacy for that. And she was out in the hallway going, "What the hell's going on?"
Right.
Sorry. No, but that literally, that's what she was saying. So we're like, "Oh, we have these robots. Would you like to interact?" And it just completely quelled the situation because she was escalating and escalating. And it really de-escalated the whole situation. And she was able to interact with that robot until it was time for her to go back into her room. So that was really positive. And then there was another patient who was just very agitated. And at the nurse's station, they're like, "Can we have a Paro robot?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'll bring it over." And brought it over, and I came back an hour later because typically it's an hour interaction. They're fine. They're like, "No, you have to leave it here." And I was literally driving home that night going, I forgot to go get the Paro. So I had to turn around and go back because there was no place to store it on the unit. I stored it in my office. So I had to turn around and go back and retrieve the Paro robot and put it back and clean it and put it back in my office. But that was very funny. But we're hoping to show that it decreases the use of one-to-one sitters and decreases the use of antipsychotic medications and may decrease length of stay. And because one of the things is if you decrease one-to-one sitters, their length of stay shortens because most long-term care settings won't take a patient that's still on a one-to-one sitter because they wouldn't be able to care. They wouldn't be able to provide that level of care.
Right. Be out of pocket.
So we'll see. We'll see. What I'm really, really seeing, though, the results of is joy. Just, positive emotions from the older adults, much more verbalizations. That's what I'm seeing qualitatively from that. We do videotape the participants who interact with the robot so we can go back and rate the videos on smiles, interverbalizations, how many times they interact with the pet and interact with the robot. We have not done that analysis yet.
You should think if you're video recording those, Notice Observer has facial recognition software that would code all of that.
Oh, great.
For you. It looks at the eye gaze. So I haven't used that particular aspect of it in my work, but that's the program we use to do all the coding.
That's great.
The mealtime
Yeah, that'd be really very, very helpful.
And it's
I think if I do this again, I would do a galvanic skin sensor to measure the emotional response, because that's really a lot of what I'm seeing. It's a very positive emotional response. So have them wear it 10 minutes before and then have them wear it while they're interacting with the robot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just been really very joyful.
Yeah.
So I
I think
really
it's-
want it to be freely available.
Yeah. Well, I think it's great to hear about your research and the use of technology to improve health and health outcomes in lots of different ways. So if someone wanted to learn more about your work or get in touch with you, what are some different ways they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me is through my email, because I'm always on my email. It's Pamela, PAMELACA at UPenn.edu. Or you can reach out to me through at Aging Sense One, my Twitter handle. And now you know why Aging Sense, not only having a sense of aging, but the sensory component
Right.
of older adults. That's where that came from. And that's the name of my company as well. So this has really been fun.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. So if you missed the episode with Dr. Pam Cacchione around her heart failure socks, be sure to check that out. And thank you so much for being with me today to talk about your really exciting and innovative work in robotics.
It was a team effort, believe me.
Yeah. No, I love
Thank
to
you.
see nurses doing work like this. So it's been a lot of fun talking to you
Thanks.
today.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to This is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World. I'm your host, Melissa Batchelor, and if you'd like to learn more, you can check out my other episodes on my YouTube channel by subscribing and ringing the bell to get immediate notifications when new content comes out. In addition, you can also find the audio version of the podcast on Amazon Music, Spotify, iTunes, and Stitcher. Please feel free to leave an honest review, because more reviews mean more awareness of the podcast and helps us move towards an age-friendly world. If you have a comment or a question, you can visit my website, melissabphd.com. Go to the Contact Melissa tab, and you can leave me a voice message. You never know, it might just include your question or your comment in an upcoming episode.